Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where every day we take a popular topic and explore how technology is transforming our world, but in a language that everyone can understand. And today, I want to tackle the subject of digital IDs. Because here in Europe, governments have been paving the way for digital IDs. And I know in the US, Apple is rolling out a feature that will enable US residents to upload their government-issued ID into their wallet app. And some states, such as Mississippi and Florida, have already launched or working on launching their own digitised driver's licence program for residents. So while a digital ID solution does offer a more convenient alternative to physical IDs, the high sensitivity of these documents means that the approach will come with many potential security and privacy implications that governments must be prepared to face. And there are whole other implications to explore as well. So today, I've invited Bala Kumar from Jumio onto the podcast, who'll be sharing his story and insights today around this topic. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Portland, Oregon, where you can join us both in conversation about digital IDs. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Neil, thank you for having me on. My name is Bala Kumar. I'm the Chief Product Officer here at Jumio. Been here for a little over a year at this point, and I'm having a blast. It's been a really good, productive year, and we have made quite a bit of progress in terms of features, capabilities, and what the value that we want to deliver to our customers.
Excellent news. And before we learn more about your success, I always like to learn more about my guests and how they got where they are today. So my question to you is, how did you get here? What's your origin story, and where did your passion for tech come from? And what was it that put you on this path you're on today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Bangalore, India. Mm-hmm. I started my career at Oracle in Bangalore as an application developer. Did that for about a year and a half. Loved coding. But what I enjoyed most was my interactions with the business analysts, the business users who were providing the requirements for us. And every time I would get on a call with them, I would try to understand the bigger picture, what problems they're trying to solve, why those are the important problems to solve. And I always found that more fascinating than just the coding work to deliver on those requirements. So an opportunity presented itself around 2000. Thanks to they're based in the Bay Area, they brought me over as a business analyst. And I spent about a couple of years working with their company, Zen of e-business, working with a lot of startups, trying to figure out their business plans, figuring out how they can bring their products to market. And from that, transition into a product management. A lot of times folks say product management is the most difficult job on the planet because you are the glue. You're trying to keep the entire organization aligned. To some degree, that is true. But I think the tougher job is really for the frontline folks, the salespeople, the sales engineers, the customer support people, because they are dealing with customers in real time. Whereas we product people have the luxury of sitting back and drawing pictures on a whiteboard and trying to figure out how we want to bring that to fruition. So I think even though it's challenging to orchestrate and bring all the different stakeholders together, I really think the frontline folks have it more challenging because they are dealing with happy customers, great, but sometimes you have those unhappy customers and they have to try and figure out how they manage with that. So it's definitely a good place to be from a product standpoint because you have the vantage point. You're projecting where the market is going and you're trying to figure out how you can take your organization and your product set to that spot in the marketplace as well, which is what makes this very interesting for me from a career standpoint. A lot of times folks ask if you could go back in time and if you could change your career and you could do something different, what would it be? For me, there's no question. This is what I enjoy doing. This is what I love doing. And this is what I would want to keep doing.
Wow, what a great story. And of course, it was that path that led you to Jumio. And I did interview your CEO, Robert Prigg, on here about 3 years ago. So I assume he's still there. But can you remind the listeners of what Jumio is and the kind of problems that you solve?
Yeah, absolutely. If you think about identity, assurance and wanting to know whether you're interacting with the right people, that's where Jumio comes into the picture. So we are all about identity assurance. our singular purpose is to eliminate identity theft, especially in this breach climate. It is stunning to see how much of our personal information is compromised. I guarantee there's some pieces of your personal information that's out there in the dark web. There's some pieces of my personal information that's out there in the dark web. So it's just stunning how much of this information is out there. And that essentially enables fraudsters to create accounts in your name, for them to defraud a lot of organizations in your name, right? And you're not even the good people. They're not even aware this is happening, right? And so what we provide from at Jumio here is the ability to not just verify the information that's provided on an application form is correct, but we provide that next layer of assurance by requiring a driver's license or a passport or other forms of national ID to be provided. We check to see if the document is a valid document, because fraudsters are a pretty smart bunch. I mean, they know how to go create almost real-looking counterfeit documents, right? And so we provide the ability to ensure that those documents are valid. And in addition to that, there's also a biometric angle where we take a selfie of that individual, and then we compare that picture with the picture that's on the document as well. So think about this, right? If you're a fraudster and you have access to a bunch of compromised information, great, you can go all day long and you can start plugging in that information in application pages, pretending to be the real user. But when you get to that next check of, we would like to see a driver's license, or we would like to see a passport, or we want you to take a selfie, they'll immediately drop out of the picture, because the last thing they want to do is post for a picture, because now that can make its way to the cops and they can essentially track you down, right? And so we are providing the necessary controls with the least friction to be able to quickly get that assurance that you're interacting, dealing with the right people. So anytime you're in a situation where identity matters, you want Jumio in that equation.
And there does seem to be a bit of a trend at the moment around governments moving towards digital IDs. So I'm curious, is that something you're seeing? And can you tell me what you're witnessing out there, and maybe provide a few examples of what you're observing at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a couple significant drivers for this shift. One is organizations choosing to go down the digital transformation path. Some organizations already made the investments to go down that path, and some others who've been waiting to see how others do it so they can learn from their mistakes. But a lot of them are now being forced on the path because of the pandemic, right? With the pandemic, a lot of organizations have had to shut down their branches, and a lot of the transactions, commerce, etc., has shifted online. So in these faceless channels, it's essentially brought a ton of urgency around digital identity. And so even folks who were waiting to see how others go through the process have not had a choice, and they've had to accelerate their efforts to rolling out digital identities. The important piece, I think, is the need to be able to distinguish between true digital identities and digitized identity documents. Oftentimes, these are confused in the marketplace. These are two separate identities, right? The first one is really a new form of identity, right? This is your digital identity in the online space. Sometimes you get asked, do you want to log in with your Google ID? Do you want to log in with your Facebook ID, etc., right? That's very different from digitized identity document, which is essentially a picture of your driver's license or your passport on your smartphone. So it can be used for face-to-face use cases where you hold up your phone, they can look at the document and then make sure it's a good one. So we need to distinguish between these two. A lot of the states, especially here in the US, are starting to go down that path, following the mobile driver's license ISO standard that was rolled out for mobile driver's licenses. These can be used offline. These are meant to be read by humans or by specialized hardware readers, where you can scan it. For example, you've probably seen things like that at TSA when you're going through airport security. That said, online use for these types of digitized identity documents it's not imminent. It's planned for later. In fact, the specifications for those have not even made it to the draft stage yet, right? So these digitized identity documents are more focused on the face-to-face channel at this point. That's here, and so the shift to the digitized ID document is probably more prevalent here in the US. In the European Union, they're taking a slightly different path with the new EU Digital Identity Wallet initiative, which is expected to be available to all EU citizens in the next couple of years. right? So they are the EU government or the EU is going in a slightly different path, and those identities are specifically designed for online use. And these digital identities will be available for use by governments as well as folks in the private sector.
And of course, although digital solutions do offer a far more convenient alternative to the traditional physical IDs, the high sensitivity of these documents means that this approach could come with a few potential security and privacy implications. Can you expand on your feelings around that too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think anytime you have a new form of verification, authentication, etc., that gets rolled out, there is always that. It essentially opens up a new venue for fraudsters to start probing. Right? The fraudsters are constantly looking for vulnerabilities in the system. They're constantly trying to figure out new attack vectors that they can use. So anytime you try to roll out something new, like the Digital Identity Initiative or digitized identity documents, that becomes very attractive for fraudsters. That said, I think a very important aspect here is digital driver's licenses could be a more secure alternative to physical documents because it is less prone or it is actually harder to counterfeit, right? And you can go online now and you can find places where you can plug in any information you want, any name, address information, and you can say, I want a driver's license for this state or this country, and you'd be surprised for how real or good these documents can look. So, companies have made it relatively easy to counterfeit documents. We believe the digitized IDs will be a lot more difficult to counterfeit. That said, I think the privacy and the security concerns are real for the reasons I stated, right? The fraudsters are constantly going to be looking for vulnerabilities in the system. The second thing, from a privacy standpoint, there's also going to be this concern that, this could be a gateway for organizations and for governments as well to be able to track data online, right? Because if you're using a digital identity, now you're leaving your footprints and it becomes a lot more easier to be able to track. And so that's definitely going to be raising quite a bit of privacy concerns for people. For example, the mobile driver's licenses standard that we mentioned, it leaves the door open for the verifying party to be able to call home to the issuer, right? So you can call the DMV and be able to say, hey, is this a valid one? Is this good or not? And every time you do that, it makes it easier for governments or other organizations. In this particular case, since you're hitting the issuer, the government would be able to track the usage of these identities across all the different places that the citizen uses it, right? So from that perspective, there is definitely going to be concerns from a privacy standpoint. The same does not apply for physical documents, right? I mean, you think of the number of times you've been able to go and show somebody your driver's license. Nobody's tracking it. Nobody's seeing how often you did that. But as soon as you switch to a digitized means, it becomes a lot more easier for folks to be able to track it. So there's definitely that privacy aspect of it. And then back to the fraudsters, hackers these days, they've got a lot of sophisticated tools, and it makes it anything like this digital means makes it a very attractive proposition for fraudsters, and they're definitely going to be probing. They're definitely going to try to hack into it. So it does leave that level of concern. From our perspective, from Jumio's perspective, we believe that you could still accomplish a digitized world for this by following the right framework. So if, for example, we strongly believe in decentralized storage without the creation of a central honeypot that hackers and fraudsters would be able to get to, right? So by decentralizing identities, I think you can still accomplish the need for digitization, while at the same time having the right controls from a security standpoint as well. It's always about finding the balance.
It really is. I think something else we should possibly bring up as well is the fact that big tech and indeed cyber attackers and hackers, etc., always move much, much faster than governments, who always seem to be playing catch up to a certain degree. So do you think governments are ready and prepared to tackle these security implications? Presumably, they need the right partner in place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on. Governments by design are not set up to move fast, right? I mean, I was just reading a news article the other day about the situation in Ukraine, where Elon Musk's team was able to respond to new attacks against the Starlink satellite setup within 24 hours. And a US Air Force general came back and said, wow, this is impressive. If we had to do this in the government, it would have taken a committee. It would have taken days for us to assess the impact. It would have taken months for us to agree that these are the changes we should make for us to be able to respond to that situation in real time, right? And so there is a certain degree of bureaucracy that is probably necessary for the right accountability, et cetera, but it is not necessarily set up for agility. Right. And so to your question, government's ready and prepared for this? I would say it's definitely a key aspect, right? It's top of mind for governments. It's something that they take very seriously. It's something that they would definitely want to be able to do. And they also have to try and figure out how you get the general population bought into it, right? Like, how are you addressing the privacy concerns? How are you addressing the security challenges that come with it? How do you manage the tracking abilities that are going to be there? And so I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and it's going to be a period of time before all of this comes to fruition.
We have people listening all over the world, and maybe some people in these kind of circles. So from your point of view, what should governments be considering when safeguarding their resident identities? Because as you said, it is something that's very important to them, and it'd be great just to send out that right message as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's a easy, straightforward answer to this. I mentioned one earlier, which is around decentralized storage. We firmly believe here at Jumio that is the most important aspect in terms of how you bring the right levels of security to play. And along with that, it's also the rules of engagement, right? Like data minimization. How much data do you truly need? How much data do you need to collect? And that's going to vary based on the specific use case. And it's not just the data that you collect, but also how much of the data do you want to share? And so there has to be selective sharing as well. And all of these need to be built around specific use cases. For example, consider you're trying to open an account online for discussions on for online forum.
Yeah.
There's no reason for them to know your physical address. But oftentimes, I mean, I've seen this happen so many times. I'll go into a site, I'll download an app, and there'll be name, address, email, phone, and some instances go as far as social security number. I'm like, why do you need all that information?
Yeah.
And it's not like I'm getting a mortgage or I'm getting a car loan, right? But still, companies, I mean, let's face it, in the real world, companies are valued based on the number of users they have and the amount of intelligence that they have on those users. Right. And that essentially sets them up for better valuation, et cetera. And so even if there is no reason or no need for that type of data, oftentimes you'll see companies asking for that type of data. Just open your mobile phone and look at your location sharing information, and you'll see a ton of apps that are actually getting your location information. And they may not even need location information for the service that they're offering. Right. And so it comes down to, when do you collect? What data do you collect? And how do you use that data? How much of that data do you share, right? And so I think for the safeguards that the government should be thinking about should be catered around this entire notion of right privacy, right security, data minimization, selective sharing of the data, and most importantly, and this is something that we take very seriously at Jumio, is around decentralized storage of the data.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. And there's a topic that's being discussed here in the UK at the moment is how to prevent children from seeing adult-related websites. And one idea that's coming around is a digital ID system where only adults can authenticate and access that. And on the surface, it's a great idea. Nobody wants children looking at that kind of material. But of course, critics on the flip side of that say, well, if it's a government system and an adult is authenticating with a digital ID, can the government see what that person's looking at and what his preferences are or her preferences are? And it brings up a whole heap of privacy challenges. So I'm curious, are there any other big privacy challenges that you think could arise through a digital ID system?
Any new system that that government or others try to bring into play needs to bring in a really good, strong element of trust. And if folks understand why that information is being asked for and how that information is going to be used, there's a more likelihood of them adopting these types of capabilities. Back to our earlier discussion around data sharing or minimalistic data capture, selective sharing of the data, right? And if you're able to demonstrate that you're putting all those right checks in place. If you're able to demonstrate that the data is secured the right way, I think it will increase the trust of the participants. But again, to your question around the privacy challenges, right? When the sharing of this data becomes really easy, when it becomes very convenient for folks to be able to do that, we are going to see a new wave of phishing attacks, where the attackers, they may pretend to be a popular website, for example, to convince people to share their identity, right? So now I've got my digital identity on my phone. I can quickly verify, validate myself. But how do I know who I'm providing this information to, right? And so it is critical that we have to factor that into consideration as well. So it's not just about me being verified, but it needs to be bi-directional. I need to know that I'm interacting with an authentic party as well. Right? I mean, think about the number of emails that you get that go into your spam directory, right? Like, sign up for offer X or offer Y and click here. And I mean, I see this all the time, and it's scary. I mean, I'm in the security space, and I see some of these, and sometimes I look at this going, is this legitimate? I mean, I know it's not legitimate, but it looks so authentic. I guarantee if that email went to my mom or my dad or others who are not in the space, who don't understand how these fraudsters operate, are going to be gullible. They're going to go click on that link, right? And so in the future, when it becomes a lot more easier to share your digital identity, unless you have that bi-directional verification, it is going to increase the compromise of digital identities as well. So it's critical that the end user can also have confidence that they are sharing data with the verified party. So it has to be bi-directional. So again, these are some of the things to take into consideration. This is a quick conversation where I'm highlighting a couple, but I mean, if this is a conversation we can have for hours and find dozens of these types of challenges. And which is why I think rolling out something like this needs careful deliberation, needs careful planning, because you're going to get one shot to be able to do this.
And how do you see this space evolving over the coming years? And equally, what excites you about that, and where Jumio fits in that future too?
Yeah, this is something that we are already thinking about, we are planning for, because we do believe this is going to happen. The only question here is when. And the vast majority of people are good people. When we talk about the security concerns and the fraudsters attacking, etc., it is coming from a space of us being concerned about how our data may get compromised by a few bad actors. And those few bad actors are making life challenging and inconvenient for the majority of good people, right? And so to your question, how is this going to evolve? There is a lot of urgency to want to do this. But I think it's going to take quite a bit of time, several years in reality, for mass adoption of digital identities. But when it is implemented, which is why I said it's only a matter of time, it'll be so convenient for end users. Here in the US, when I go through airport security, I'm so glad I paid extra money for the subscription for TSA Pre. Yeah. I can literally breeze through security lines here in Portland, especially if I used to do a lot of red eyes. I'll be in and out of security in less than 2 minutes. I'm not exaggerating. Literally, I would walk in. I'd probably be one of two people going through the TSA pre-line, and I would be through. I'm not taking my jacket off. I'm not taking my laptop out of my bag. I'm not taking my shoes off, because I'm a verified traveler. Versus going through the regular line, where all of these are very different, right? You could get frisked. You have to take your laptop out of your bag, take the toiletries out, take your shoes off, right? And so we compare the two. And it's no argument that the extra fee is so worth it to be able to go through TSA Pre, especially if you're a frequent traveler. So that type of convenience is what citizens or consumers crave for. And digital identities will be able to provide that type of a convenience. But we have to be very careful about the bad actors that may take advantage of that, which is why, like I said earlier, this is going to be very deliberate. This is going to take quite a bit of time for governments to try and figure out how best to do this, because they have very little margin for error, and the stakes are going to be very high. So the rollout of a digital identity world is a matter of, it's going to take time, It's going to be slow. It is going to be deliberate. But when it gets out there, I think for the good consumers, it's going to be a huge, huge blessing.
Yeah, completely agree with you, especially on the TSA approved thing. I have that as well for when I come to the US, and the time that it saves and the hassle, especially because typically when I come to the US, it's for a tech conference or something, and I've got a laptop, a podcasting mic, and all that kind of thing. So to be able to not have to get that out every time I go through security is an absolute lifesaver, isn't it?
It is. It's funny. My TSA pre expired recently. During the pandemic, I was not traveling much, and I didn't realize it. And I got to the airport and I realized I didn't have TSA pre. I was like, oh my God, I have to go through this other line. And I had not left much time for me to be able to navigate through security. And so that's when you truly appreciate the value of these types of convenient services. To me, that's why Jumio, we are betting big on digital identity. We are already planning ahead. We are making significant investments around our plans around decentralized storage and aspects like that. Because like I said, this is a matter of time, and we are going to be one of the companies that have the edge because we've been planning for this for a while now.
Excellent. Well, we began this podcast talking about your origin story, but now we've come full circle. I'm going to ask you if there was a song, piece of music, movie, book, or anything that has inspired or helped you in your career, and we'll add it to one of our lists. What you're going to leave us with, and is there a story to accompany that so we can leave everyone listening on an inspirational note?
Well, I'll give you one. Music, I love Yanni. Live at the Acropolis was one of my favorites for well over 20 plus years now, 30 now. It's something that I've enjoyed. It always is very inspiring, motivational. I usually don't listen to music when I'm working, but that one, I make an exception. And it's also become a favorite for my kids now. So when they go to sleep, sometimes they have it playing in the background as well. It's very uplifting. And to watch him perform, it's not just the audio, even the visuals, to watch him perform, it's true artistry, in my opinion. So that's on the music side of things. Books, I read a lot, and of late, in the last, especially since the pandemic, whenever I go running, I'm listening to audiobooks. So I work through a book at least a week. A couple that stand out for me, Elon Musk's biography by Ashley Vance. It's definitely, it's a must read for anyone interested in innovation, anyone interested in product management, in my opinion. It just shows how a brilliant mind works. Whether you agree with his principles and politics and other things or not, just the fact that this one individual has made such a huge impact across so many different areas, so many different organizations, that it's just mind-blowing. And now we can add Twitter to that story. And the original book, it's got a lot of choice words and not appropriate for kids, but turns out there's actually a kids version of that I got for my kids to read. So it's a much toned down version, but still the same inspiring story. So that's definitely one of the books I would highly recommend. A couple others that come to mind are Reed Hastings. It talks about the Netflix culture. It talks about how they build the organization around having the right culture. So it's definitely made a huge impact on me personally in terms of how I think about interacting with people, how I think about growing my teams, how I think about setting up our people for success. So it's definitely made an impact on me. The other one is, this is something again good for adults and for kids as well, is Bit Scaling by Reid Hoffman. And it's basically a journey of many companies that have gone from a startup stage and figured out how to scale up their organizations. So it makes, it's light reading, it's good reading, but you get to see a variety of organizations going through their scaling efforts. So those are some of the books that come to mind.
No, they're great choices. I'll get them added to our Amazon wish list, and also the music to our Spotify playlist, so anyone can check those out. And before I let you go, for anyone just wanting to learn more about Jumio, the topics we've discussed today, or even contact your team, what's the best starting point for everything?
Like I said at the start, if you have any need identity related, then feel free to reach out to us. We have a ton of expertise in the space. Over the years, we have operated and worked with 200 documents from 200 different countries. We have processed well over 500 million ID scans to date. That's more than the population of the US, right? And so I just spoke about bit scaling, right? We know how to scale an organization, and we've done a phenomenal job with that. And so we are, without doubt, the leader in all things ID documents. So if it's a driver's license, a passport, a national ID in any country, we can help you. But we don't just sit on our laurels. We have gone far beyond that in the last several months. We have expanded out a solution set to offer an end-to-end orchestration solution as well that provides, from the point in time end consumer knocks on your door, being able to verify them, be able to look at the risk associated with the device that they're using for that transaction, looking at their name, address, email, phone, any government-issued IDs like an SSN, and then being able to workflow that to step-up authentication with a driver's license or a passport, and being able to provide that single decision. We have the tools to be able to do that, along with continuous monitoring of that individual, right? So it's not just about helping you onboard a consumer into the system, but once they're into the system, being able to monitor their behavior patterns, being able to monitor transactions for compliance with AML regulations, for example. Those are things that we can do as well. So if you are in need of a solution where you need strong assurance about the identity, if you need to be compliant with KYC, GDPR, other regulations, AML regulations, then let us know. We're more than happy to help.
Fantastic. Well, I'll add those links to the show notes so people can find you guys nice and easy. I think we covered so much today about digital ID solutions, how they offer a convenient alternative to physical IDs, but also the responsibilities that come along with that and the potential security and privacy implications, all washed down with your great personal story there, your backstory. 3 great books and a great song for our Spotify playlist. So thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and share that with me today.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you for having me here, and very good, insightful questions. This is definitely where the market's going. So really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about this very important topic.
What a great discussion about what we currently know about digital driver's licenses, what government should consider to safeguard the residents' identities. And I also enjoyed exploring the privacy challenges that might arise with a digital ID system, as well as some of those best practices for ensuring that the system is truly secure. And I don't think there's anything more important than that right now. But over to you. You've heard me. You've heard today's guest. I want to hear your experiences and your insights, questions, whatever it may be. So please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram @Neil C. Hughes. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk if you'd like to work with me. But that's it for today, so a huge thank you for listening. I'll return again tomorrow with another guest, so thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.